All right, welcome to Halitics. I'm Hal Ginsberg. So glad to be talking to you today. This Friday, the Friday free-for-all, of course. It's just afternoon on the right coast, just after, I guess, 9 a.m. in California, where I used to broadcast. Today, I hope anyone will call in while I'm live. I'll be here for about an hour. 240-242-5646. Maybe some controversy, maybe not. I'm not going to talk maybe at all, unless I get some calls about my usual topics, that is war in Israel, war in Ukraine, really slaughter in Gaza more than war in Israel. That's where my focus has been. I think those are perhaps the two most important issues of our time, along with amped up tensions with China, the problems we face in Asia with the two largest countries in the world in terms of population, India and China, and the global Holocaust, the climate catastrophe that is caused by humans burning fossil fuels. That's not what I'm going to talk about today, although I guess you could tangentially see those issues in today's program, at least a little bit, the failings of NPR, which are kind of getting a close attention by virtue of an article by Yuri Berliner, a former contributor there, former employee at NPR until very, very recently. I think he just resigned, was it today, or he was fired? I don't know, something like that. He is separated from the company after, or institution, whatever you want to call it. Is it a company? It's a nonprofit after 20 plus years, 25 years. Exactly, according to him at least. So we'll go through his piece. I want to talk also about Briahna Joy Gray's response. Some of it she got right, but most of it I fear she kind of missed the real point. And I talk about Briahna Joy Gray a lot, not because, and I point out where I think she gets it wrong, not because I dislike her, not because I don't respect her, but just the opposite. I really do like her. I really do respect her. But the reason I started doing this live stream is I felt there's no one who has my perspective really, closely, who really sees things the way I do in this space, in media, whether it's new media, live streaming, podcasting, or certainly traditional media. It just isn't there. So that caused me to think there is room, there's a niche for me, and so far, we'll see. I guess the jury's still out if there's that niche for me. So we'll get there. By the way, I do want you, please, if you haven't yet, like and subscribe. Like the videos, subscribe to them. It's hard. People say this all the time to me. It's so hard to break through that algorithm, the vaunted Google, YouTube algorithm that determines whether this video or other videos, what videos show up in your feed when you click on YouTube. Certainly if you subscribe, you're going to see it, but clicking alerts really, really helps. Clicking that bell so you get notified when I go live also will really help me break through that algorithm. Let's get to it. So the story that really kind of triggered a bit of uproar and certainly a response from the folks at The Hill Rising, Robbie and Briahna Joy Gray, aforementioned, is this from Yuri Berliner. Just a few, by the way, I was going to say 2 weeks ago, not quite. 2 weeks will be this Tuesday. Monday is Earth Day. I used to enjoy Earth Day, go to Earth Day events and the like, kind of more of a stay-at-home, stick-in-the-mud type, especially in the past year. I just haven't been getting out there to events. But certainly Earth Day is something worth celebrating, or at least worth lamenting what we're doing to our one and only biosphere, the island on which we all live. And really, I know, despite the efforts of a few billionaires to escape it, obviously people like Elon Musk with his SpaceX are hoping maybe they can flee the planet that they're helping to kill. We'll see whether that ever transpires. My guess is no. From Yuri Berliner, I've been at NPR, said 25 years, here it is, 25 years, and here's how we lost America's trust. I don't agree with everything he says, but I think it's really provocative, it's really important. I am not a fan of NPR. One of the reasons I started KRXA 540 way back in 2005, not that long after Berliner had started at NPR, is because progressivism really wasn't being reflected in NPR. It was, and he kind of says it in his piece, at least back then, 19 years ago, what you heard, I guess, on NPR was pretty much a corporatist viewpoint. You'd hear right and left, but you wouldn't hear socialism. You wouldn't hear real criticisms of the capitalist ethos that the United States was embracing at that point, whether it was the neoliberalism with sort of a human face that the Clintons championed, or the aggressive neoconservatism of the Bush administration, along with, again, more neoliberalism when it comes to economics. You'd hear some critiques, certainly, of the Bush doctrine, which was that the U.S. should use its military and what people defined the Bush doctrine as to impose democracy around the world. Of course, we did nothing at the time. We certainly weren't interested in democracy. We were interested in labor and labor markets where we could exploit low-wage workers, or at least our capitalist class could exploit low-wage workers to the detriment, of course, of American labor and also markets for our products. So that was really the Bush doctrine writ large. And you didn't hear really aggressive critiques of it. You'd hear a little bit, they'd always have 2 or 3 voices on programs at that time, often 2 conservatives and 1 liberal, a Barney Frank type liberal, never even a Bernie Sanders. Recent years, they've kind of eschewed. Well, they still have economic conservative viewpoints, but they're very woke. I think that's what Berliner really, really beefs about, is how woke they are, and also just how clearly they suffer completely from Trump derangement syndrome. And this is all, in the end, designed to keep poor, struggling, working people at each other's throats, to divide us by race, to divide us by gender, divide us by ethnicity, rather than to unite us in support of some kind of just society. So here is what Berliner complains about. He starts out his piece, and this is a paragraph or 2 in, but he says people don't really trust NPR anymore. They used to trust it. They would get, again, you get Cokie Roberts, and you might get I don't know, you get Evan Thomas, or pretty much the Weekend Review type people. Nina Totenberg on the left, and not really that far to the left. And then maybe Robert Novak on the right. That was the old NPR. And now you don't have anyone on NPR, at least, who defends it's pretty much the same. It's pretty much the same, except they've really gone full-scale DEI. And the concern that Berliner identifies that so many people have who used to like NPR is why are they telling me what to think? That seems to be a commonplace that he finds. And this is getting a lot of pushback. Let me show you what Briahna Joy Gray has to say. We'll get to that now. And I'm going to go through it because a lot of what she complains about, or, well, here we go. Let her speak for herself. It's unfortunate, though. It's really unfortunate because Berliner makes some very good points and they're lost. And I'm going to resuscitate them. So here's Gray. Let's see if we can get this.
Overall, I agree that we have too much of an establishment bias in news sources. I did appreciate one.
Right, so she says, I agree we have too much of an establishment bias. That's not really Berliner's point. I think Berliner's point is more they have only a democratic sort of an establishment. She says too much of an establishment. But there's a Republican establishment too. The voice you get in NPR is just purely the Democratic establishment. Now, I don't want to hear the either establishment except to expose them for their corruption. But yeah, you have a pro-military, pro-neoliberal ascendancy at NPR, and then they cloak it in a certain kind of wokeism.
One of Berliner's colleagues at NPR writing a response, his name is Steve Instep, on his...
So she says Steve Instep, actually it's Steve Inskeep, who did respond to Berliner, and we'll show his comments in a bit, but she extols Inskeep, which is very, very unfortunate. Very unfortunate, because he is the ultimate establishment character at NPR, and yet Briahna Joy Gray not seeming to get that when she criticizes the NPR flavor, the establishment flavored NPR, but praises Inskeep for his comments.
Substack. I don't agree with all of it. I do think that there are these issues at the company, but I do think he made an interesting point about how Berliner was commenting on people in sectors of NPR that he did not work in and did not know very much about the editorial process. And apart from, I think, really strong points about...
Which is just false. If you read the article, he's very, very, that is, Berliner is plugged into the editorial process and even talks about meeting with some editorial directors to discuss the tone at NPR, and was rebuffed. So the criticism that Berliner is kind of an ignorant of the in workings rings very, very hollow if you read the piece, which is in the Free Press, by the way. And a lot of people say, oh, it's the Free Press, it's right wing, it's extremist. Yeah, I get that. But where else are you going to get critiques of kind of these democratic establishment organs? That's why I'm here, because this voice criticizing the Democrats invariably from the left, it's just not out there, especially when you criticize the DEI as well, which I do. You do hear some of that from Jimmy Dore, but he's gone full-scale conspiracy nut, disbelieving, for example, the clearly proven climate holocaust, embracing crypto and fantasies like that, extremist fantasies like that, anarchic fantasies like that.
Russiagate, which again is this establishment bias, I think a lot of it does come across as personal grievance when you read.
So she's saying that Berliner is grieving. He's making personal, saying it's not fair. I was treated poorly, which, by the way, I don't think is necessarily an indictment of the piece. I mean, it's fine if you're treated unfairly, then explain why. But I don't think he says that. It doesn't come across as personal. She's just wrong. Read the piece at Free Press. I'll put a link to it after the program. But it's really good. A lot of it's good. I don't agree with all of it. He does come across as a little bit too conservative for my taste. And some of his criticisms I don't think are really that serious, but they're not disproven as she'll claim they are.
Some of the factual errors that he made in his article.
So she gets that. She says, oh, he made some factual errors. And we'll address those because she makes a serious error when she claims, Briahna Joy Gray makes a serious error when she claims there are errors, at least exposed errors, proven errors in Berliner's piece.
I saw factual errors alleged, but I wasn't actually sure what they meant by any of that.
For example, he argues that that everybody who works at NPR is a registered Democrat.
All right, so she says he argues that everyone who works at NPR is a registered Democrat. At no point, by the way, this is she's kind of mirroring what Inskeep says. At no point in the article does Berliner say everyone at NPR is a registered Democrat, and we'll show that in a moment.
And the guy who wrote this article is like, I'm in fact, he at a meeting pulled out his voter registration card or whatever, some documentation, and said, I'm actually I'm not registered as anything. And when he put that question to Berliner and said, well, I'm the first person you're talking to about this, basically, and I'm already disproving your thesis. He's like, well, that doesn't matter. It's about the gestalt of things. He's like, well, how do you know what the gestalt of things is if you didn't actually ask anybody and don't really...
All right, so, I'm not going to play more of that. I just wanted to say again, I'm kind of disappointed, or I'm really disappointed in Briahna Joy Gray. Earlier this week, I did kind of a mea culpa where I said, I was unfairly critical of Dean Erwin Chemerinsky of the University of California, Berkeley Law School, when I took the word of Briahna Joy Gray that he was in favor of doxing, that he supported doxing Palestinian students, or pro-Palestine students, I should say, not Palestinian, but pro-Palestine students, doxing them. In other words, they don't get credit for working on journals that don't support Israel, that don't support, quote, the right of Israel to exist. And he never said anything of the kind. In fact, he's been very critical of doxing. He doesn't believe that students should be punished or exposed because they side with Gaza and they side against Israel. So Briahna Joy Gray got that wrong. And that was disappointing to me. And again, she got this wrong too. So I want to get right back to the piece by Berliner, because the factual error, the one factual error that Briahna Joy Gray identifies in response to Robbie's question was that he allegedly wrongly stated, wrongly claimed that everyone at NPR was a registered Democrat. But he doesn't say anything of the kind. And this is not the only alleged error that's hardly an error at all in the piece. But I wanted to just quote, because it's really important when people, and I do this all the time, by the way, when somebody says, well, you said this, or they attribute a position to me, then my first question is always, what did I say? When did I say that? Quote me, please. You say I say that. You say I believe this. Why? Where's your evidence? So the evidence disproves Briahna Joy Gray. In fact, Berliner says, concerned by the lack of viewpoint diversity, not diversity in terms of race, ethnicity, religion, none of that. I'm concerned that we don't have a lot of viewpoints expressed. And so I looked at voter registration for our newsroom. I assume you can do that easily. He knows the names of the people in his newsroom. He looks them up online. In D.C., where we are headquartered in Minneapolis, I found 87 registered Dems working in editorial positions and 0 Republicans, none. All right, he doesn't say everyone at NPR. He's speaking specifically about D.C., and he doesn't say everyone in D.C. He's not even talking about everyone in D.C. He's talking about editorial positions. And he doesn't say every editorial worker in D.C. is a Democrat. What he says is that of the 87 people that he was able to determine where they were, or not even that, of the people that he examined, of those, he didn't find any Republicans, and he found 87 registered Democrats. He doesn't say every single person he looked at is a registered Democrat. This certainly leaves open the possibility that there are unregistered folks, that there are Green Party registrants, there are Libertarian Party registrants, there are DC Statehood Party registrants. He's saying that of the people that I looked at, of that, in that subset in DC, there were 87 registered Democrats and 0 Republicans. So he doesn't say every single person there is a Democrat. It's just not even close. And the fact that Inskeep says, well, I'm not a Democrat, doesn't disprove anything that Berliner said. Because Berliner didn't, if he had said, I'm a Republican, if Inskeep had said, I'm a Republican, and by the way, there it is, Inskeep. If Inskeep had said, I'm a Republican, that would have disproven Berliner's point. The way you disprove Berliner's point, Inskeep, is you say, oh yeah, I talked to this person and that person and the other person, and they're all Republicans. And they work in the DC office. So there is viewpoint diversity. But he doesn't do that. He doesn't identify one Republican. In fact, his example kind of proves Berliner's point, right? The one person that he can identify who isn't a Democrat is an independent, is not registered. So again, the criticism kind of bolsters, right? It bolsters Berliner's point, which is that NPR is, a very limited, cramped organization in terms of viewpoint diversity. And I want to just quote exactly what Inskeep wrote. His first example of a factual error is where he writes, Inskeep writes, that Berliner said his editorial colleagues were unanimously registered Democrats. Doesn't say that. I've been through that. He doesn't say they're unanimously registered. What he says is he found 87 registered Democrats and 0 registered Republicans. When he says, I'm registered with no party, he says, oh, people gasped. Oh my gosh, Yuri Berliner misled us when he said that there were 87 Democrats and 0 Republicans. Well, guess what? You didn't prove any misleading there, Inskeep. And that's really disappointing that Briahna Joy Gray couldn't catch that. She didn't delve into it. She was prepared. She was prepared to disbelieve Berliner because in some ways because he's anti-woke, he's anti-DEI. He says we should have viewpoint diversity, but not necessarily focus solely on identity diversity. She doesn't like that. She doesn't agree with that. She has a problem with it. She's trying to find something wrong. And she failed. And you can see this excellent comment here by Kahashkin, which repeats, or, we both see it exactly the same way. Berliner never claimed that every single member of the NPR editorial board or bureau in DC was a Democrat. He said there were 87 registered Dems and 0 registered Republicans, which of course leaves open that some or many were not registered to a party. Now, it would have been a good rejoinder, right? If what's his name? If Inskeep had said, hey, by the way, we're going to get into who Inskeep is in a moment. And also why this is really important. Some people might think that, why are you wasting our time with this, Hal? Because NPR is really important. Because NPR is really influential. Because what NPR does has an impact. And their impact is very pro-corporate. Their impact is very pro-military. Their impact is hurting our country. That's why. That's the reason why I'm focused on it. All right, so Inskeep brings up another issue that Briahna Joy Gray doesn't talk about, although she kind of alludes to it because she supports the DEI. She supports let's have lots and lots of diversity. Let's focus on identity. Let's have, black, white, Latino, Native American, Asian. We have to have all these different people, lots and lots of checkerboard type situation, because if we have lots of different viewpoints or different identities, we get lots of different identities, we'll get lots of different viewpoints. The problem is that just hasn't happened. Yes, they're diverse in terms of their identity, but no, they're not diverse when it comes to the viewpoints expressed. It's funny because Latinos are, 35, something like that, right? Numbers say 35, 40% for Trump. And yet not one registered Republican in the DC Bureau, at least none identified by Berliner and none identified by Inskeep in his criticism. By the way, who is Inskeep? He's the host of Morning Edition and Up First. So he's a big shot at NPR and he doesn't like his ox being gored. And we'll get into the real reasons he doesn't like what Berliner says in a moment. But the other alleged error, according to Inskeep, is that Berliner says that NPR shouldn't keep using the term Latinx because the term is offensive to Latinos. And Inskeep acknowledges it. Yes, it is offensive to some, or it's true that many don't like us, like that, including some at NPR. This may be why NPR does not generally use the term. And he points out that in the past 90 days, he found virtually no use of the term Latinx. He says he finds 9 uses. I don't know. In the past 90 days. That response, it sounds, oh yeah, you got him. That's a gotcha moment. Here's our guy, Berliner, the critic, saying, why are you using the term Latinx when Latinos don't even like it? Well, we gotcha. We aren't using it, right? In the past 3 months, we haven't used it. Here's the problem. First of all, they did use it. He said he found 9 instances. And Berliner doesn't say they use it all the time. And Berliner also wasn't talking about the past 90 days. He was talking about a meeting he had back in March of 2022, over 2 years ago. That's when he brought up the issue. So the fact that now, according to Inskeep, NPR isn't using the term Latinx very much is irrelevant to the fact that it was brought up 2 years ago and that was something that Berliner complained about then. In fact, his complaints may not have fallen on deaf ears. Maybe there was a recognition, yeah, we shouldn't be using this term. But even there, if you look more closely, Inskeep's alleged gotcha is a fail. Even after the meeting between Berliner and the manager, who he says basically just was polite and gave him, the brush off. Morning Edition, which is where Inskeep is the host, although he's not the only host, Morning Edition kept using Latinx. And I thought this was so interesting because he says, according to Inskeep, people are saying Latinx on our program, but it's not us, it's not our host, it's our guest. But here's from Reddit. It was the Morning Edition host back in June of last year, so more than a year after the meeting, in which Berliner complains and says, hey, you're using a term that's offensive to the identity group that you're ostensibly trying to placate, to reach out to support. You're saying Latinx because you think that's what Latinos want. It's not what they want. And then on Reddit, it's pointed out, the Morning Edition host, this was a different host, not Berliner. I'm sorry, not Inskeep, uses Latinx. And it was funny because, and I looked at that, it's true. The host used the term Latinx, and the interviewee, who I believe was Latino, but might be wrong about that, uses the term Latino. It's kind of humorous, right? Like even there, NPR's wokeness backfires on them. And it turns people off. I mean, just bottom line is it turns people off. Even the claim by Inskeep that NPR doesn't use the term much, it's kind of BS. And I looked at, this is the website right now. So they're promoting, they have 1 million different stations and all this. So they're promoting their diversity. Look, we've got this podcast, alt.latino. So they call it Latino. So sounds like they're not using the term Latinx, right? And they use the term alt.latino I'm guessing, because they're trying to appeal to Latinos who don't like the term Latinx. But on the website itself, they say the global Latinx community is evolving. This is in English. It's not in Spanish. It's not necessarily those who are going to be listening. They're people that they're trying to reach who are Latino. They reach in different ways. This is more for the woke DEI crowd that may be at the NPR website. And they use the term Latinx twice. The global Latinx community is evolving and growing fast. Then alt.latino, because when we're doing our podcast, we call it alt.latino because we are trying to appeal to Latinos who don't like the term. And then they use it again. Felix Contreras and Ana Maria Serre sit down with a different living legend or rising star to discuss Latinx culture. So yeah, they keep using the term. I mean, who really cares? I don't care. But it's funny because it disproves the allegation that Berliner got stuff wrong. He didn't. He got stuff right. He was right when he said that they're all Democrats. Or if he wasn't right, no one's, and they've tried, can't prove him wrong, that there's no Republicans there. No one's proven him wrong. Yeah, there was one unregistered. That doesn't mean that there were Republicans. So why then the uproar? Why did Inskeep write that piece in the first place? If, really probably who he does. What does he care about Latinx? Why does he care about? He doesn't. He doesn't care about, even the issue we don't have a lot of. And the criticism that there aren't Republicans on board, I don't think there should be. I don't trust a journalist who would be a registered Republican. I'm starting to not trust a journalist who is a registered Democrat. I think both sides. But in the District of Columbia, it's a one-party district. So I get it. There probably wouldn't be any Republicans registered there. It's not that big a deal, to be perfectly honest. This is the big deal. This is what really upset Inskeep. When the content, the actual reportage is pointed out to be biased, bogus, false. That's what Inskeep has a problem with, because he's a host. So Berliner points out really egregious errors by NPR, and it's never come clean. The worst, NPR hosted Adam Schiff 25 times about Trump and Russia. Obviously, Schiff not a credible source. Obviously, Schiff very biased. Schiff getting money from defense contractors. Schiff and the defense contractors very, very upset when Trump held up the shipment of arms to Ukraine and using that against him, saying, oh, you did it for corrupt reasons. You did it because you want an investigation into Hunter Biden, not, and maybe probably that's true. But it was still the right thing to do. And the reason Schiff couldn't care less what Trump's reasons was, it's just a pretext. The real issue is that it costs weapons manufacturers who contribute to Schiff money. NPR platforms Schiff 25 times, according to Berliner. And the name Adam Schiff is not found in Inskeep's article. So Inskeep criticizes the factual errors. He comes up with 2 non-errors. He doesn't respond. He can't challenge what Berliner said about Schiff. Schiff was their go-to guy. Schiff was the darling of NPR. Schiff was given softball questions and, basically an open mic at NPR to present his pro-military contractor propaganda. And again, none of this is challenged. The word Russia, the word Russiagate, the name Adam Schiff, nowhere to be found in the critique by Inskeep. And he also notes, does Yuri Berliner, and I think very fairly, that NPR was constantly trumpeting Russiagate, breathlessly, every new possible evidence, all evidence that Trump is guilty, he's covering it up, he's responsible, he and Putin are in cahoots. That was breathlessly covered. Then, when the report found no credible evidence of collusion, which is exactly what it found, the coverage was notably sparse. Russiagate quietly from our program. It's huge. It's an enormous failure. And it was completely swept under the rug. Inskeep doesn't mention it. Why doesn't Inskeep mention it? Well, I mean, maybe this is why. Because Inskeep is was one of the primary malefactors, one of the primary voices at NPR amplifying Schiff. And this is what Briahna Joy Gray should have been talking about. Instead of citing, as she did, with approval, Inskeep's apple polishing, Inskeep's self-congratulatory tone. Oh, we're doing such a good job. It's very, very, very disappointing. And again, this is why I do this, because who else is there who's doing it? I don't think anyone is pointing out these massive failures. Not just by, the mainstream media, corporate funded media, NPR, but also by ostensibly, and you'd hope, truly independent sources, truly progressive sources like Briahna. And I think she told, I heard this, she's able to say whatever she wants. She is not vetted, which I believe is true, by the way. The Hill doesn't vet her. Now, the Hill is a corporate too, right? So they're far from perfect. But that was disappointing. So why then, disappointing that Briahna Joy Gray would not confront more directly the very, very legitimate critiques of NPR, try to defend them. Apologia, it was an apologia, it was just wrong. Why is this such a problem? Because when NPR platforms the Adam Schiffs of this world, they provide them with extraordinarily valuable coverage. People always said, oh, Trump got all that earned media, free media, whatever you want to call it. He was covered all the time. He didn't have to pay for it. It was always on CNN. He was always on, he's always on Fox, whatever. That was a major criticism of Trump or of the media for failing to keep Trump off the airwaves as though he wasn't news. But Schiff it was worse. The media would cover Trump events, but often in a dismissive tone, often, putting him down, condescending. Adam Schiff was presented as some kind of an expert, somebody who really is in the know, who gets it. And this is a guy who's very far from progressive. Votes for bloated military budgets time and again. Is only, now and then will vote with the Progressive Caucus when somebody's watching him. And NPR, by platforming, this is, by the way, exactly what you see with Jamie Raskin. All that media attention really turns these people into superstars. Now, I could say, and I would say, it's not just the media's fault. It's the voters' fault. We need to be a little bit smarter about this. We should be saying to ourselves, well, wait a second. If NPR, which gets a tremendous amount of funding, grants from oil and gas, from the for-profit healthcare industry, from military contractors, Lockheed Martin is a notable underwriter of NPR programming. We should be saying to ourselves, well, wait, if these bad actors, if these malefactors, if these greedy capitalists of the worst sort are all in for and are funding NPR, and NPR is platforming Adam Schiff, then maybe Adam Schiff ain't what we should be looking for. Maybe Jamie Raskin isn't who we want. But I guess I asked for too much from voters to see those nuances. All right. Briahna Joy Gray doesn't like this part of this. Is more back to Berliner. By the way, 1240. If you want to call me 240, I'd love to talk to you. 242-5646. I'd really like to have this conversation with you. Berliner complains that the management at NPR, I guess around in the late 20 teens, declares diversity is our overriding mission, our North Star. Race and identity are became paramount in nearly every aspect of the workplace. Journalists were required to ask everyone we interviewed their race, gender, and ethnicity, among other questions, and had to enter it into a centralized tracking system. So what really, I'll just say what immediately jumped into my mind when I read that was an interview that NPR did, John McEnroe, back in 2017. So I want to play a bit of that because I think it kind of tells you what's wrong. And then we'll hear from Briahna Joy Gray and final word, maybe from Serena Williams before we move to another topic, but which is going to be related, by the way. But I want to just get this in because I thought it was so fascinating that that NPR had made it, according to an insider, right, someone who was there, that this kind of wokeism, this identity, innate gender, ethnicity, sex, that's what matters. That this became so big, right? And it made me immediately think, as I mentioned, of this interview back, and it was already, so even, this is 2017. This is before it got really, really bad, at least according to Berliner. So let me just play this right here. This is from, like I said, 2017.
Come as easily as that. It's way more difficult.
So John McEnroe being interviewed on NPR.
Talking about male players, but there is, of course, wonderful female players. Let's talk about Serena Williams. You say she is the best female player in the world in the book.
Best female player ever, no question.
All right, so sounds pretty positive, right? Pretty complimentary. By the way, McEnroe did not bring up Serena Williams. This is brought up by the interviewer. I think her name is Lulu. I'm not exactly sure. I think it's a hyphenated name, and I don't want to mangle it. But Lulu says, "Oh, you brought up Serena Williams. You said she was the best woman player today." And he says, "Oh no, best ever, best woman player ever." And listen to what Lulu's quest fop is.
Some wouldn't qualify it. Some would say she's the best player in the world. Why?
And he's like amazed. Well, the best player in the world. So my first thought is, well, of course she's not, because she's not better than any of the top male players. So how could she be the best in the world if she's not the best? She wouldn't win. She wouldn't beat other players. But it's kind of interesting because you could, and I, in retrospect, would have asked her immediately, well, what do you mean by best? How do you define best? Because you could say the most dominant, right? Like if you say the most dominant in their against the competition they face, the one who wins most consistently against the competition they face, probably she would be. Serena Williams probably would be the greatest ever if you're only talking about domination against those you play. But I think most of us think the best ever is the person who would win against everybody else who they are playing. That's kind of how I define it. So Katie Ledecky is arguably the most dominant swimmer of all time. But she's not the greatest swimmer because she wouldn't beat Michael Phelps. All right, here we go. More from this interview.
Qualify it.
Oh, she's not, you mean the best player in the world, period?
Yeah, best tennis player in the world. Why say female player?
And by the way, I'm saying, isn't that funny? Because that question is so exactly consistent with what Berliner describes. Race and identity. So here, journalists are required to ask everyone you interview about gender. And so this woman, Lulu, asks this incredibly divisive question that just gets everyone in a tizzy. And that's fundamentally absurd. I mean, of course she's not the best player in the world. And we'll hear from her in a moment. We'll hear from Serena herself saying, no, No, I'm not the best player. But let's just get just a little more from this.
Well, because if she played the men's circuit, she'd be like 700 in the world.
You think so?
Right, and that's maybe even giving her a bit of a break. And does Lulu just accept that?
Yeah. That doesn't mean I don't think Serena's like an incredible player. I do. But there's, the reality of what would happen on a given day. Serena could beat some players, I believe, because she's so incredibly strong mentally. But if she had to just play the circuit, the men's circuit, that would be an entirely different story. So maybe at some point a women's tennis player, can be better than anybody. I mean, I haven't seen it in any other sport, and I haven't seen it in tennis. And I suppose anything's possible at some stage.
Where do you go from here?
Right, so she lets it go at that point because she knows she's lost that. But it was an incredibly stupid question, and a lot of criticism came up against McEnroe, not against NPR, but against McEnroe for the way he responded. But I just thought that was kind of interesting that Lulu, raised that question. But if for those who would say, well, no, it's reasonable, maybe Serena is the best. He said also that maybe one day a woman could be better than the men. It's hard to, I don't know how that could happen, right? I mean, that seems possible to imagine. In a sport that requires so much on speed, strength, reflexes. But I guess anything's possible. Here's what Serena had to say.
Well, who would it be?
Well, I don't know. Let's say you would be the...
I was hoping you'd say...
All right, feminine side. And me.
And you. Oh. Well, actually, it's funny because Andy Murray, he was been joking about myself and him playing a match. And I'm like, Andy, seriously, like, are you kidding me? Because for me, tennis and men's tennis and women's tennis are completely almost two separate sports. So
completely
like,
different, totally different sports. So that's why McEnroe has to say she's the greatest woman tennis player. I think he should have turned it on Lulu immediately and said, well, when you say, why do I hedge it and say she's the greatest woman player, not the greatest player ever? I think he should have said, well, how do you define greatest? I would have said, how do you define greatest? And if she said, well, the one who dominates their competition, then I'd say, okay, well, if that is your definition, then she's maybe is the greatest. Maybe not, but maybe. But the problem with making that allegation or that claim is that you could argue that some high school student that nobody ever heard of who wins every single match, 6-love, is the world's best tennis player because they're completely dominating their competition. At some point you say, well, it's not just you dominate your competition, but your competition is as good as competition could possibly be. So she mentions Andy Murray, I guess at the time of this interview with Letterman. That was when Andy Murray was one of the top-ranked players. He's not now, but it shows you how strong the men's game is too, why that whole argument of being the dominant player as the greatest kind of fails. Because in the men's game, you have Federer, Nadal, Murray, Djokovic. Those guys are all so great, all winning multiple Grand Slams. The fact that I think Djokovic now has really separated himself from the others. But 10 years ago, Federer had separated himself. So the fact that none of them has dominated to the degree that Serena Williams has is an argument that she's the greatest in terms of dominance. But it's also an argument that she's not the greatest ever because she hasn't faced competition anywhere near that level. And I think that's something that also McEnroe was getting at when he said, well, if she played men, maybe she could win like a game, but she couldn't win consistently and obviously against that level. But she doesn't even think she could win a game. Here she goes.
If I play Andy Murray, I would lose 6-0, 6-0 in 5 to 6 minutes, maybe 10 minutes because it's true. It's
honestly,
true. It's a completely.
Really?
It's a completely different sport. The men are a lot faster, and they serve harder, they hit harder. It's just a different game, and I love to play women's tennis, and I
I
only
mean,
want
and
to
look
play
at
girls.
Serena. She's so strong. She's so sculpted. She's in tremendous condition. But she's like, yeah, at the very right end of the curve in terms of tennis skill, there's hundreds of men to the right of me who are just more skilled, stronger, faster. I mean, obviously, I couldn't hit a ball that I wouldn't touch the ball. It's not like she's not a lot better than most men. It's just that the very, very best male athletes, and that's why are better than the best female athletes. And that's why the argument from NPR really was so divisive and wrong-headed and so misguided. Now, maybe he could have addressed it better. I get it. But still, to try to conflate the two was a big mistake. I think it's really important that we get this too, by the way, because, and when NPR, and this is another reason why NPR is so harmful, because by trying to erase meaningful differences between groups of people or identifiable groups, they make it harder for us to really solve the problems. And you see this from a lot on Facebook now, the sort of same idea. Oh, how come women basketball players are making such a pittance compared to male basketball players? Well, because they're not as good, because they don't jump as high, because they can't shoot as well. In those competitions where you see three-point competition, the women use a smaller ball, which makes it much easier. Are they better than me? Of course. I'm not saying that I could play with them, no. But no one's paying a penny to watch me play basketball. People want to watch in athletic endeavors the biggest, fastest, strongest, most coordinated people. People who can do things that are way beyond what any of us can dream of doing. And that's why the men get paid more. It's that simple. It's silly for us to try to change human nature. Because as humans, we do admire otherworldly, preternatural skill sets. And that's never going to change. So you could say we have to pay women the exact same amount who play basketball as men, but that counters human nature. The real solution is to say, okay, different groups of people have different sets of skills. So what do we do about that? The market is going to reward some people at exorbitantly high amounts. The market will do that. Because, for example, billions of people will go see Taylor Swift in concert or buy her, songs on Spotify, download her singles. Billions will do that. Zero will do that for Hal Ginsberg. Does that mean that Taylor Swift should have billions and Hal Ginsberg should have nothing? I'm probably a bad example. But no, the point is that the market rewards certain people at exorbitant levels and others it doesn't. So that's why we have government. That's why we have taxes. That's why we have a society that makes sure that everyone, or should guarantee, everyone has enough. It's too much. People who can dunk a basketball and hit 35-foot jump shots regularly, or serve 130 miles an hour, whether it's Serena Williams or Novak Djokovic, who can serve even harder than that, they're going to get plenty. They're going to get theirs and a lot more. Raising their taxes to a level that guarantees all of us have enough and no one has too much isn't going to kill them. It's not going to hurt them. It's just going to make society better. It's that simple. And that's the problem in the end with what NPR is doing. It pits poor, struggling, and working people against each other. Race lines, gender lines, along sex lines. And that's very, very, very hard. That makes it that much more difficult for us to bring about positive change in society. All right, I got a couple more stories. I did want to touch on this. And it kind of goes to that whole story about the Serena Williams and how she, would lose in straight sets, straight games, 2-6 love, 6-love to Andy Murray, who isn't even the best tennis player in the world. I mean, he's close, but he's not the best. And this story is getting a lot of attention, and I think it's very pertinent to it, so I wanted to show you this. I actually asked someone who'd been on my show before to come and discuss it, but I think they've kind of ghosted me, which I'm very sorry about. They don't agree with me on this, and this position has upsets people. But I'm like, well, too bad. I mean, you don't have to like it. Then tell me why I'm wrong. So this Association of Small Colleges, the NAIA, mostly smaller colleges, but with still some influence, still some sway, I guess you would use that term, has decided that transgender women are not allowed to compete in women's sports at NAIA sanctioned events. See the dateline was a little less than 2 weeks ago. I think it's the right decision. I really support this. And I've heard a lot, the argument that I hear a lot is there's two. It's not fair to the transgender women who can't compete in the sports they love. And it's it ignores the reality that transgender women aren't any better than bio women, or they use the term assigned at birth women, which I reject, because doctors don't assign your sex to you. The sex that you have for your entire life is determined at conception. And if the sperm is an X, it has an X in it, you're a woman. And if the sperm is a Y chromosome, you're a man or a male. Just that simple. I mean, that's how it works. Now, there could be some forms of androgyny. Sometimes certain sex organs don't develop as they're expected to for a variety of different reasons. But your sex ultimately is determined by whether the male, well, it's not male, whether the sperm from the male is an X chromosome or a Y chromosome sperm. And if it's a Y, then the zygote is a male, and the fetus is a male, and the infant is a male, and the child is a male, and so on. Now, apparently, there's a very, very slight exception to that. There can be, and some people have been identified as having an XXY, and then you androgynous. So that's an incredibly rare circumstance, and we can deal with that when it comes up, if it comes up. But my response would be generally, you can always compete against men. You can always compete against boys. Maybe not lower ages, because we don't want people getting hurt and all that. But you're not banned. You want to compete in a sport, you can compete. If you're conceived at birth male, you can compete against other males. What we're not going to sanction are events where in competitive sports that aren't co-ed, and they do have co-ed, they have cheer, co-ed cheer, so trans females, or I shouldn't really call it trans women, trans girls, trans women can compete in cheer events. Maybe one other sport I think they fight, and that is a sport. I mean, cheer is tough, cheer is hard, and they're co-ed teams and all that, so I'm fine with, I don't see a problem with that. But in contact sports, the risk is too great of injury. And I understand the argument. And I thought it was made the best argument I heard, and it made me really, really, really think about it, was we don't have examples of trans women dominating sport. Even Leah Thomas, who's often cited, yes, she did break some records at Penn and maybe some Ivy League records in one event where she had a great day. But she didn't break any NCAA records. The Ivy League is not a swimming powerhouse conference. And I really thought a lot about that. And what it boils down for me is two things. One, if you need to ingest hormones and you need to have testosterone blocked, you need to have implants and all of this, all these physiomedical interventions to reduce your advantage, then that's too much. Then we have to be doing testing, we have to be doing investigations, and we have to look at this, and we have to check that. No, that's too much. And I would say even that would be okay if it weren't the fact that every trans girl or woman on a competitive sports team takes the place of a bio girl or woman. There are limited amounts of spaces, and they are taking spaces that were presumably set up for bio girls and women. And the fact is, we have seen evidence that notwithstanding all the blockers and the various interventions, there are some trans women, trans girls who are bigger, stronger, and dominate, and they hurt other girls and women. They hurt conceived at birth girls and women because of their size, strength, and speed. So, to me, the idea of fairness doesn't really come into it. Because because it's not like there's more spaces. If we let trans girls and women, if trans girls and women are entering spaces that are previously reserved for bio girls and bio women, then there are fewer bio girls and bio women in those spaces. I don't see why the trans girl or trans woman's, quote, right, unquote, to compete on a varsity sports team should be greater than the right of the bio girl or bio woman whose space she takes. I don't see that. I'm not persuaded. And there are risks of injury. So I think this is the right decision, and I support it. All right, one other story. I don't think we need to play the... one other quick story, since it is the free-for-all. I'm just past my time, but it really struck me that the Pacific Grove, this is, by the way, taken from the Monterey Herald, to which I continue to subscribe many years after leaving. I was always kind of amazed. Now, California has at least the city system there is different. Their cities are largely run by these city managers, which is a little different. We do have some city managers here. It depends on the city, but mayors are often just a ceremonial post. The real work is done by these managers. And it always kind of astonished me the kind of salaries that they get. So over $250,000. That's an awful lot of money. You could house 4 or 5, there's a lot of homeless people. House 4 or 5 people in that kind of money. $250,000. I mean, doesn't that seem excessive to you? I don't know how that can be justified. Teachers are starting at $55,000, $60,000. This guy, $250,000 a year to start, and it'll probably go up from there. I know it's expensive to live in Monterey County. I know Pacific Grove ain't cheap. It's just, it's a city with 15,000 people in it. How does that work? How does that make sense to you? 15,000 people are supposed to be supporting a manager, and he's going to have a staff of with $250,000. You can't get someone good for $125,000? I got to believe you can. I think I'd rather have somebody who's prepared to, give their time, effort, energies for the people of Pacific Grove because they love the community. They want it to be as good a beautiful, perfect city, Butterfly City, America's last hometown. Now, I could hear you say to me, but hell, 150,000, 125,000 in Pacific Grove doesn't go very far. And I would say you're right. So you know what? Throw in residents. A room. Doesn't have to be like a dump. I mean, a place that's nice. But to live, right? But $250,000? It's insane. There's something so wrong with our society. And I finally would say this. If we're going to be paying people that kind of money to be city managers out of taxpayer money, I can't think of a better argument for much, much, much higher top marginal tax rates. I can't think of anything better. First of all, we raise taxes, over 100,000, over 200,000, right? Over 200,000, what you take in over 200,000, maybe you pay 40%. So the tax, the $50,000 over 200,000, taxpayers will get 20,000 back. So we'd care a little bit less about all that money going to the sky. But a big reason for these outsized salaries to these city managers is because of the exorbitant pay that some people, especially in California, are making, whether they're CEOs of Silicon Valley corporations, big shots in Hollywood. The oil and gas industry has a lot of presence in California. Big ag, healthcare. These are people making 8-figure salaries, sometimes more. So the relatively, and I don't believe this, by the way, but this sort of industry of I'm a city manager, that kind of like expertise, I know how to run a city. I get it. Running Los Angeles would be really hard. Running San Francisco would be tough. Running a poor city like Bakersfield, that's going to be a challenge. Relatively poor city. How is running a city like Pacific Grove with a gazillion advantages, a very small population, does that require you to pay someone $250,000 a year just to get someone to do it? But I get it. The city manager industry has got got the idea out there that, well, if you want to get really good people, if you want to get top people, you have to compete with private industry, and they're paying millions and millions of dollars. Yeah, to a few people, maybe. But again, if we start taxing those multi-million-dollar salaries at much, much higher rates on the margins, over $1 million, you're paying 50, 60%, over $2 million, paying 80, 90%. We get to that level, people aren't going to be like, maybe going for private industry, maybe there isn't such a huge advantage going to work for some corporation. Maybe there's benefits working for the community. All right, that's going to do it. I appreciate every opportunity I have to talk to you. I will be back on Monday. It will be Monday with Arlen. Enjoy your weekend.